Hello and welcome back to another episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School. I'm your host, Charlie Mann of law firm Alchemy. I've got a friend on the show today who specializes in something that, man, is so near and dear to my heart because I have my own journey of going from reluctant salesperson to absolutely loving sales. And I'm sure we're going to talk about it with him as well. And shining a bright spotlight on that sales idea, but also I got some questions for him about some of the stuff he's out there doing in Central Texas, which sounds totally nefarious, but it really has to do with creating like legacy through buying businesses and a whole bunch of other stuff. So I'm happy to have on the show my friend, expert salesman, principal at the Northwood Group, and multifaceted entrepreneur, Adam Boyd. Adam, welcome to the show.
Charlie, so great to be with you. I'm a big fan of you and what you do and how you do it. So it's let's have some fun.
Let's have some fun indeed, and let's kick it all off with the question: what's the one thing they don't teach you in law school?
Well, I think I need to be really honest about this. I studied for the LSAT in my first year out of college, and thought I'm going to go to law school. I didn't really want to be a lawyer, but I thought this is the answer. Like, you got to go to law school. I was reading the Federalist Papers and everything else. And I thought maybe I'll be a senator one day. And so I thought I need to go to law school. And I was studying for the LSAT and I took some practice tests and I said, you know what? This is not Legally Blonde and I'm not going to Harvard. And those logic games just beat me. So I didn't go to law school. So I can't tell you that. But having worked with a lot of attorneys and known a lot, the thing that I'm aware of, and one of the things that I get to help people on, is they didn't learn anything about business development or sales in law school, from the emotional intelligence required to the types of persuasion needed to move someone ethically, morally, appropriately, from just checking you out to wanting to hand you a check. So that's what I have seen, is that it's just not taught. And even amongst the older generations of practicing attorneys, there's an aversion to selling. They see it with distaste. It's a 4-letter word. It is crude. It is uncouth. So that is the thing that I see that is just not handled. And obviously you getting to work with owners who want to build entrepreneurial firms see that they don't teach a lot about business generally, but this is the thing that I see day in and day out.
Yeah, and you're exactly right. I love the word uncouth. It is absolutely treated as uncouth to think about selling. And in law school, a lot of it is built around the idea of we're going to construct you into such a good product that you almost don't even have to worry about selling, which is just their coded way of saying, go find work at someone else's firm, tuck in behind and cross your fingers. You're going to be invited to become a senior partner at some point in the future, which, how do you become a senior partner? For the most part, you're going to have to generate business. Hey, but they don't talk about that. So I mentioned, because I think this is always instructive on the sales front, I mentioned I have my own little thing about being the reluctant salesman, but I'm curious about your journey in becoming a salesperson, someone who loves and coaches on sales.
It's probably not a lot different from yours. I mean, the way it went, the way it occurred might be different, but the emotions behind it were probably very similar. So I got out of business school and I didn't have a good plan. And someone offered me an opportunity to work with them. And I thought, I'll learn sales, but you don't learn sales from books. You don't learn sales in sterile environments. You learn them by going through it and by doing the work. And I did something that most people will never have to do. I sat in a room without windows and I made cold calls on business owners and CEOs.
That's
and
real.
I did this for a while. I was probably making 40 calls a day, and it was painful because I was so aware of feeling like I was failing all the time. And I had to work on shifting my mindset from thinking success is defined as a percentage of, like a majority percentage of successful outcomes, to saying, hey, really success is more like baseball, where if you're a 300 hitter, you make the Hall of Fame. And I did this, and then I started to have some success, and I got business various ways. And then I got more comfortable making calls, and I still make calls, but it was a really painful process of looking forward to the weekend, but then Sundays were really painful because I had to go into the week and do this thing that I was failing at all alone by myself. And over time, I reprogrammed a lot of my thinking through a journaling process. You probably have one,
Ooh, tell me
but
about this, yours.
yeah. So I kept a journal, and one of the things I would do is I would review my feelings and beliefs, and this was sort of a very basic way of doing it. I basically say, well, how do I feel? And then how do I want to
Mm,
feel? And I would write that down first person, very short, simple sentences that I could kind of hang on to in a way to almost brainwash myself. And
mm,
there was a lot of self talk that I had to engage in to kind of continually do things. And then even before I would go and have a meeting with a prospect, I would have to kind of self talk so that I was in the right emotional and mental state to go in and have a conversation and listen and be present and eventually
mm.
ask them for money to help solve their problem. So, my process, I did not intend to go into sales. I came from a family of salespeople, but it was not my intention. But here I am now. So,
Look,
yeah,
it all pulled you back in at some point or another. I mean, like I
absolutely.
love a good reluctant salesman journey, and you went through the like really the gauntlet on it. Cold calling is a beast unto its own. So I'm really
Right.
curious in that process of going through cold calling. You mentioned the journaling exercise, but over time, within the context of that or outside of it, what ultimately shifted for you both in terms of accepting
Mhm.
sales and
Mhm.
getting into it and then starting to get better at it as well?
Yeah. So one of the things that I saw is that there aren't a lot of people who are actually good at it. Now, there's this misnomer that we can just hire someone who's good at this thing, almost like I'm going to hire an accountant or a bookkeeper because you
Right.
assume they all rolled off the assembly line, ready to go, and they know what to do.
Sorry.
But there are a lot of people, and I've dug into some data that, it's really only about 20% of people who are in something related to selling professionally who are good at it, who could reproduce their success if you took it away from them, they had to start over.
Interesting.
So I just continued to work and I was like, okay, I'm good. But at a certain point, you have to say, you have to make I think you have to make one of two decisions. One is in anything, whether it's law, whether it's acting, you and I've talked about, whether it's being an athlete, you have to say, this is my craft and I'm going to
Mm.
do it really well. And if you do it really
Hmm.
well, it creates these other opportunities. Or you at least have to say, this is a fundamental skill I have to be good at. And any entrepreneur or business owner, law firm owner, they have to master several of these, or they at least have to be competent enough in it to know
Yes.
how to identify the right talent. So I hope I'm answering the question. I got to a point and I was like, I'm having some success. I'm doing something right and
Hmm.
I need to keep going because the rewards for this compound as over time, as you get better, as you learn more, and it creates more opportunity. So,
Yeah. That it's you've also taken a lot of practice reps at
right.
selling. So
Yes.
at least for me, one of the experiences was over time taking those practice reps, it was hockey stick growth in
Yeah.
the
It really is.
ability to convert people. So talk to me if you had one of those moments. First off, did you have that hockey stick moment? What did it feel like? And,
Well,
what
here,
changed?
this is going to sound a little woo woo,
Perfect.
but
We're in the right place for woo woo.
I was journaling. And one of the things I was journaling was like, hey, I need to close a piece of business a week. It wasn't that I needed to, I just wanted to.
Mm,
And I think I was journaling that for about 8 months. Every business day. I didn't journal on the weekends. I journal during the week and I'd say I close a piece of business a week. I close a piece of business a week. And it didn't matter how big, right? It could be a 4-figure piece of business. It could be a 6-figure piece of business. But I was like, I'm going to close a piece of business a week. And I remember looking up at some point and I realized I'm closing something. I'm winning some new business every week. And I just thought, that's really powerful. And it
yeah.
wasn't that the journaling was the magic. It was just my brain and my attention were so focused on this thing that I continued to work at it. The next thing that happened was I was meeting with an industrial psychologist, and this guy has played a pivotal role in my development. A guy named Dr. Jim Kessenbaum. Jim's up in Rochester, New York, and I worked with him for about a year. I would meet with him twice a month for 2 hours at a time. Had to read a bunch of stuff on emotional intelligence, understanding myself, and I was stuck in my head, as a lot of us tend to do. And I was telling him, I was like, I just don't feel like I'm really good. And this was about 12 years ago, and he said, "Well, let's just look at the facts." And I said, "Okay." He said, "Just let's walk through the last X number of months." And he said, "Pull
Mm.
up everything you've worked on." And I did. And he said, "Well, how many of those have you closed?" And I was like, "Well, I'm winning 1 out of 3 of the opportunities I get in front of," which isn't, for the types of things I was doing, it wasn't bad. I was like, "Well, I can just engineer that." He said, 1 out of 3 is not too bad. And it clicked. And I said, "Okay, I need to move from being stuck about how I feel about it to looking at the facts. If I
Mm.
can just engineer 3 opportunities, I'm going to win one." And I would know going into a week, if I have enough opportunities on the calendar, I'm going to win enough. So, um, that was a big thing for me, was getting to that place where what I was envisioning started to happen. And then someone, kind of probably like you do for a lot of your law firm owner clients, you call out something they can't see. My friend Scott Grubb says, "We can't read the label from inside the jar."
Yep.
And that's kind of where I was. Yeah.
Yeah, man. I love that quote. I first heard Pat Flynn use that quote. I don't think he had the attribution on him at the time, but yeah, you can't
Yeah.
see the label when you're inside the jar. Like, it's a profound moment.
Yeah.
It's it can be a complete game changer. It's why people should engage with an industrial psychologist. Admittedly, Adam, that's not a term I've ever heard before.
No,
Industrial psychologist.
this guy was great though. I mean, he ran me through, um, and I don't know all of the work you do in Genesis and some of your work with clients, but I mean, he ran me through a battery of assessments. Um, it was called a brain scrape, and then he began work with me, and I flew up there to do it. Now everything's done. Everything's done virtually, but
Yeah.
yeah, those are, and whether it's somebody like Dr. Jim or somebody working with somebody like you, there's something about having almost like a guide who could kind of
Mm-hmm.
help you through certain parts of your journey. And I've been fortunate to have those along my path, and I get to serve in that capacity for certain people on certain elements of their firm or their business, just as I know you do. So it's a lot of fun to be able to kind of go through those and then help others. And I think for a lot of us to be really credible in this, we have to have the scars ourselves,
Mm-hmm.
right? In some way, shape, or form. It doesn't mean we have to have done it, but it means we need to have gone through something that we can help guide them through.
Yeah, absolutely. Now, you've gone through the process of
Right.
learning how to sell, and I know that you work with law firm owners
Yeah,
now
absolutely.
on how to sell, how to increase conversions. I'm
Right.
curious, how much of the work are you doing with, say, like associates or lead attorneys in a practice versus working with intake teams? What's your balance
Yeah.
on that?
Well, what's happened is I've started to see that the firms need a certain level of mass for this work to really take place. And there's some things that I might figure out how to do better later, but there typically needs to be, for my work to be really effective, you need a strong owner or managing partner who says, "This is where we're going. This is what we're going to do."
Hmm.
And it can't be, "Hey, do what you want," because it's kind of like a football play. If everyone ran a different route, the quarterback wouldn't know where to put the ball. It's really hard to coach.
Yeah.
It's hard to get everybody on the same page. So I do a little bit with intake teams, but typically I'm working more with senior partners or the managing partner to at least get the process understood and built out. So I'm working with a
Hmm.
firm right now, and they are the first B2B firm I've gotten to work with, but they're selling to large organizations. They're providing legal work for them. And we've had to help them think about the process of moving an opportunity through. And so we're spending time in their CRM instance. We're
Hmm.
working on how they need to manage their activity on a weekly, monthly basis. Like, how many conversations do you need to have? How do you have those conversations? But in smaller firms, let's say it's estate planning or it's bankruptcy or it's family law, there needs to be some work with intake. And you probably see this. Intake is the first point of contact,
Hmm.
and they can make such an impact on conversions. This is an interesting story. I just had the gut feeling that in a firm where you have multiple intake personnel, that there's no way they would all be equal. And I just basically applied the Pareto principle. And so what we did is we looked at this one firm and I said, okay, you've got 5 people handling intake. And I asked, and this firm did about 6 or 7 different practice areas. They're a mid-sized firm, about 10 attorneys. And I said, are they basically round robining the leads? Yes. So the leads that came in, they all got the same kind and they all handed them off to different attorneys equally. And I said, okay, I want you to do this. And this is a great exercise for your clients or anybody listening to do. I said, by intake personnel, I want you to look at the number of consults they book because it won't be equal. Mm-hmm. And there was something interesting we found there. And I said, second thing I want you to do is I want you to look at the consults touched by various people on the intake team and see which ones converted to matters or to new cases. And across those that turned into appointments, the numbers were all kind of within a standard deviation, but one person was 25% better. She was setting significantly more consults than anyone else. And here's the other thing. You think, well, maybe they're not as good a quality. The meetings she set, regardless of attorney, closed at almost twice the rate anyone else's did.
Oh, wow.
And so I said, so that's the kind of thing we need to dig into to find out what's going on there. And so we just kind of bird dogged the head of intake, said, you got to find out what she's doing and how she's doing. So it's actually kind of fun because there isn't a lot that you sometimes have to do with intake. It's, and you and I could talk about this all day, but there's small changes that can yield massive results for a firm, especially a small firm.
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. I mean, now I'm curious, some of those changes. When you go in, you're doing diagnostics on a firm, let's call it between like $1 to maybe $4 million, right? Usually you're going to have some involvement of general staff. There's going to be an attorney who touches it at some point. When you go in, what are those heuristic reactions that you have in terms of what you're searching for and what quick fixes you are likely going to put in place?
Well, some of the things I'm looking for is I'm just looking at data generally, conversion rates. I'm looking for how long calls are. I'm looking for how many consults people run in a day or how many meetings they run in a day, because what we'll see is as the number of consults rises, you'll see conversion rates drop. People just can't perform at an incredibly high level all day. And
is there a general, like, here's the number of hours usually that people can operate well as a salesperson in a day?
This is not scientific. I worked with a company probably 15 years ago, and they hired stay-at-home moms who had been HR professionals to do recruiting for them. And their number was like 3 hours and 48 minutes that they can be effective and on the phone. And here's the thing that I saw. We started telling the firm, I said, people are running 8 to 10 consults a day. You got to pull it back to about 6.
Yeah.
Because the thing that would happen is that they would be on a consult and they've given themselves 30 minutes to run it. Well, if somebody's 5 minutes late, or we spend too much time on the wrong thing, or you've got someone who can't get a hold of the consult because someone is going on and on and on and repeating themselves because they need to be heard.
Yeah.
You spend the last 5 to 10 minutes worrying about how to wrap this thing up, and your mind goes to the next one, and then you go into the next one in a bad spot. So that's one thing I'd look at. One of the others is that's one key metric. I look at how long the calls are. If they aren't long enough, you don't have enough time to be really effective, right? And I see people try to bang through them in 15 or 20 minutes, and I look at it and I say, there's not enough time to really develop it, especially if let's say you're in DUI. And somebody's really they're in a lot of stress emotionally. First, they're calling the first person. They're going to have a meeting with the first person who can set up a consult with them, right? It happened on Friday night. They're going down Google's list of top of the page and they're trying to get it. And so you now have to look, sound, and feel different. And law firms don't like this, but schools are just pumping out more attorneys. They are undifferentiated. So the way they run the consult is a lot of times their best chance to be to be differentiated. And so I would encourage people, go longer in your consults. Now, a couple of the things we tell them to work on.
And this consult, just for clarification of listeners, there's the difference between like the appointment setting intake, and you're talking about like the closer doing a consult.
Right. Yeah. Whether an attorney or someone they hire.
Yeah.
And so I think that they need to go longer there. So I'm looking at data, and if they have multiple practice areas, I'm looking at things like conversion rate by practice area. Certain practice areas just convert better for various reasons. And then you kind of look at sometimes attorney by practice area, because some attorneys do multiple practice areas, and we'll see certain attorneys just should not be allowed to do certain things because they're just not good at it.
Yeah,
right.
Absolutely.
And then there are other things we look at. We look at, this is a little softer, and this is something that even with your clients that you can work on. How they think about money has a huge impact on their ability to talk to potential clients about money. So if I think $5,000 is a lot of money, but my average case size needs to be 7,500 or $8,000, I'm automatically in conflict with this person, because as soon as they say that's a lot of money, I say in my head, I agree. So those are a couple issues. And then, there's some other things. One of the big things we dig into is, because you'd asked about changes, you have to teach people on the intake side, you cannot treat this like a checklist. So the first thing that happens in a lot of intake is I'll say, you'll call in and I'm the intake person, and I immediately ask your name, your email, and your phone number. And then there are these long pauses between the time you give me something and the time I respond. I've literally been on calls and I thought, did they hang up? And it goes 45 seconds. So some of the things that we have to teach people to do are just listen. And hey, we can get information a little bit later in the call after they've shared something. We teach people to simply affirm the person that they're talking to. Like, Charlie, that's got to be really hard.
Yeah.
Right. Because a lot of times they're taking notes, filling it out, trying to get it in the CRM appropriately. And with attorneys, the things that we have to do are get them to really just find out how this affects the other person. Right. I think my guess is, I haven't worked with a lot of PI firms, but I think they have a better sense of the emotional impact on people. And a lot of good family law attorneys do. But there are others who just don't realize this is an emotional decision, hiring an attorney. It's not it's not a pure, you seem good, you clerked somewhere, you went to a good law school, you worked at some big firm. So hopefully there are a couple takeaways people can steal from that.
Oh, 100%. Yes. Look, this is also one of those things where a lot of attorneys are getting adjusted to the idea of sales is, in a lot of organizations, is a two-part process. It is like that appointment setter, which you gave some of the data on earlier, depending on who your appointment setter is and how well they're warming up or doing a better job of qualifying leads has a big impact on the closer's ability to close. Now, between that relationship, if you were to stack the deck, or if you were to fix one of those problems first, knowing that we'll get around to fixing both of them. But if I'm a firm owner and going, well, I think I've got a appointment setter and a closer problem. Where would you probably approach first?
Here's where this is a really good question, because everyone's asking it.
Yeah.
My bias is the opportunities, the leads that are showing up for the closer, whether that's someone who's hired or the attorney. That is the first area to fix, because it's the closest to the money. And if we can fix that, whether it's making sure the right person is there, they're running the right process, they have the right skills, that's the thing that really quickly turns positive. And now we can go invest upstream, and then we can work on our intake, because now the money we've spent on marketing, more of that is turning into opportunity that we're closing at a better rate. Because, one of the things people are biased to do is, let's go spend more on marketing. And you need to, once you fix the conversion issue, right? Now, look, if you don't have enough leads, go spend more there and figure that out.
Right.
Yeah.
Right.
So that's one of the biases. Let me tell you a quick story. Because I want to go back to something, and I was simply trying to help a law firm owner out. She was really frustrated, like a lot of attorneys are, because she had leads coming in and her intake person was talking to these potential cases saying, hey, if you hire us, this is the fee structure, et cetera, et cetera, et cetera.
Mm,
And
yeah.
people would show up and they'd get to the attorney and they'd say, well, it's a lot of money or it's too
Mm,
much money or I don't have it. And I was just trying to solve a problem. I didn't think about the psychology of this. I said, here's what I'm going to do. Let's just qualify them out. And so what we started telling the people in intake to do was say, hey,
mm.
you know, the fees are X. If you decide to go ahead, this was just sort of a secondary test. If you decide to go ahead and work with the attorney, how would you want to pay? And
I've heard of
what
this
happened
strategy.
was
Yeah.
we were just trying to like take them off the board.
Yeah.
Well, people started thinking about it and they would give an answer and then they would show up and they were more ready to pay because financially they'd gone through that process in their head. And so they just started ripping off new cases, assuming they'd run the process appropriately on an intake and the attorney was present and ready to execute. So
I'll affirm that because I've heard that concept of the asking how they're going to pay. I've heard that strategy discussed before, including for law firms, which just means like, hey, now we're starting to stack data over and over again from multiple sources where it's going from anecdote and experience to an actual data set of
absolutely
firms that are asking that question on average. Right, this is the hardest part about training, sales, marketing, et cetera, is we always have to say on average because we have to investigate what your market is, your practice area, you know, what resources you have, how cold are these leads. There's so many factors that go into this. And yeah, I being able to simply close more deals. And you mentioned mindset earlier. I'll say real quick. We actually, as you and I are recording this, in the last 2 weeks, we launched a sales and money mindset program for team members, specifically law firm team members, because it's so important. Now, to that end,
and by the way, for anybody watching this, I know Charlie. I spend the money, do it, work with him on this because I saw it and I was like, that's gonna be great.
It actually nearly 2x our expectations on launch. I'll share that here. You know, we were confident in the concept of it and the value of it, and the audience showed out for sure. But to that end, one of the hardest things that I find for a lot of people who work with teams on intake and sales is how do you get, you alluded to it earlier, people become very checklisty about things.
Right.
How do you get them past the I'm dancing my waltz of 1, 2, 3, 1, 2, 3, and just to dance the waltz?
Man, this is the question, and I think this is the challenge with people, and it's why AI is so attractive to everyone because we take the people management out of it. The only way I know to do it, I'm not saying there's not another way. I mean, you can hire the person who gets it, and there aren't a lot of them, but you can hire them. The other way is that you have to routinely manage these people, and you're in the reminding business. You have to remind them, these are people who might need our help. I know you're trying to execute this process, but I need you to remember to treat them like a person, to slow down. And in a lot of the training, I tell people, hey, this is what the SEALs say. Slow is smooth and smooth is fast. Slow the thing down and just listen and be present. And I'll use a lot of movie clips in my training to kind of illustrate these things. And one of them is from Bagger Vance, The Legend of Bagger Vance, when Will Smith is talking to Matt Damon. And he's like, be the ball. Just be here. Don't worry about everything else. Just be the ball. And so I believe that the managing partner or whomever's managing intake has to do a great job of role playing regularly, simulating, call it scrimmaging, if that's a better phrase, to help people realize this is how I need to do it, because they'll eventually revert back to old ways. They'll continue to try to shortcut the process. We all do. So we have to continue to work on it.
You know, I felt on behalf of the audience, I felt the collective panic attack as soon as you said regularly needing to role play or scrimmage people, because that's one of the things that they freak out about is this idea of of true practice reps, right? You know, practice reps that don't come while they are on the phone with an actual potential client. So for the person who's thinking like, Adam, but like, I don't want to do cheesy role play, man. What do you have to say to them?
So great story. I was in business school and we had a professor who was selling his company for about $50 million. He had offers between $40 and $75 million to sell at the time.
All right.
And this changed my mindset on role play. He said, the investment bankers routinely role played with us on how to handle every scenario in our negotiation. If you're role playing to handle a $75 million transaction, you can probably role play to handle a $7,500 transaction.
Hell
And the beauty of it is
yeah.
you get better and it compounds. I mean, like, think about this. I will never argue a case, God willing, in front of the Supreme Court. But if I did, you better believe I'm probably spending 20 hours preparing for my opening and closing arguments in front of a mirror with other people. So it's more about just, you don't want to practice on people who are ready to give you money. You want to practice before you get there and then just let the performance go. And you, as an actor, probably know a little bit about rehearsing.
Yeah. A little bit about it. Yes.
Yeah.
Turns out you need it to put on a show. It helps, to say the least. But I like what you said there, Adam, about being able to let go of it, letting go of that artifice where that checklist becomes second nature. I even think it's a wonderful parallel to core values in a business as well.
That's a great one.
When most people start out with core values, it's this, in their most robotic thing, like, these are our 5 core values. We now memorize them. And then eventually it's like, oh yeah, that is when, oh man, that's a great representation of intensity. Oh, that is a fantastic loyalty display right there. Some of the core values, and actually utilizing them, or even in that moment being able to do what would I do if I were doing the most loyal version of that? I say loyal because one of our core values is loyalty, and just ingraining that in the language. The same way that sales is so much. It's language, but it's tone, it's presence, it's all of that. If someone is interested in stepping deeper into the sales journey and conquering that weird dissonance between, I'm an attorney who serves people, but finally maybe there's a little bit of spark there for them. They're going, yeah, you're right. I need to get better at this. Aside from obviously contacting you, and we're going to shout you out here, what other paths would you send them down, books to read, etc.?
Yeah. So I've got this list, a shelf above me, and that's what I'm looking at.
Nice.
I haven't read this yet, but I'm looking for it. It's got to be up here. Words That Change Minds by Shelley Rose Charvet. Friend of mine named Owen Fitzpatrick recommended that. There's a lot from NLP that's really powerful. There's some really good tactical stuff you can learn from Chris Voss, who wrote Never Split the Difference. So that book is one I recommend people read. And then I tell people, don't go read the sales books because it's going to turn you off. Go read everything you can on human psychology and learn how people communicate, become good at one of the personality profiles, because I think a lot of them are built on the same basic data. So it could be DISC, it could be Myers-Briggs, but you'll learn how to adjust to people. And honestly, the other thing I would tell them to do is I would say take acting classes, because sometimes you're talking to people and you're probably hearing the same problem for the 1,000th time, and you have to appear engaged and interested and treat them like it's the first time. You might have to act a little bit. So those are some resources I would really encourage people to dive into and start to test and start to try it out. And I tell people, try it on friends and family, try it out on your coworkers, then try it out on potential clients.
That's awesome. Okay, before we pitch you and then ask you the final question, I have a penultimate question here, which is it's the price question. When a lot of times when attorneys and team members walk up to the point of quoting price, everything is panic. Literally, their vocal cords start to seize up, their breathing pattern changes, and everyone can smell the blood in the water from a mile away on that individual.
Right.
How do we handle that?
So one, the problem is never where you think the problem is. The problem is always earlier in the process. So this is going to vary by practice area. But one of the things that we want people to do, let's talk about estate attorneys, right? Someone comes in, talks about an estate of $5 million, and then complains about an estate planning fee of 10 grand. It's a move.
Right.
But what we have to do is the attorney or the closer or whomever has to develop an ability to get money out on the table in a way that quantifies the impact of what's at stake. So this does a few things. It shifts the conversation from a fee discussion to the problem discussion.
Mm-hmm.
So now we're talking about the risks posed to a $5 or $10 million estate. That's what we're talking about. So now if somebody says 10,000 is a lot of money, say, well, it's a $10 million estate. Do you want to be you want the cheapest estate attorney in town? So the other thing it does is it anchors the discussion, right? So there's a really great tactic that attorneys or closers could use, which as they get to that moment, and they'll have to practice this and role play this so they get comfortable doing it. And let's pretend that I'm just going to use 10 grand as the fee. As they get to the end, one of the things they could do to reduce resistance to their fee is say, look, good news, it's not going to be 100 grand. Now we've anchored on 100 grand. And what happens is when we say 10 grand, there's significantly less resistance. Now they may not hire you, but that's something we have to do. Earlier in the process, though, we've got to really talk about what's at stake. Because if we can quantify it, and we got to use their numbers, not ours, you really start to take all of the resistance away, because it's not about fees anymore. It's about this problem. So that's my coaching on that, is you've got to develop that skill.
I love that. All right, Adam, if people are interested in learning more about you, what you do, want to connect with you, want to work with you, where should we send them?
Yes. So I post regularly on LinkedIn. I'm the Adam P. Boyd on LinkedIn. They can go to my site now. Currently, it is thenorthwoodgrp.com. The plan is to eventually spin off a legal services only site. We haven't done that yet, so I'm peering into the future. And now that I've said this, I'll have to do it.
There you go.
But right now, it's thenorthwoodgrp.com. They can email me, adam@thenorthwoodgrp.com. I do a lot of work in the B2B space, so some of my stuff is focused on that, but I also work with law firm owners on this particular issue, and that's how they can reach me. So
awesome.
Absolutely.
All right, final little in triplicate question for you. What are you reading, watching, and listening to these days?
I am reading a book called Living Fearless by a guy named Jamie Winship, and it's a spiritual book on identity. I am also reading at the same time The Crux by Richard Rummel. He's sort of like a godfather of strategy. And his first book was called Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. I cannot recommend those books enough, especially Good Strategy, Bad Strategy. I've been meaning to, we've been watching Brooklyn Nine-Nine because my wife, it's just like a great 20-minute show, and we're big Andy Samberg fans. And, I just finished listening, like my music is Chris Stapleton, but I just finished listening to 10X is easier than 2X. 10X is easier than 2X. Have you read that?
Oh, yeah. Oh, yeah. It's awesome.
It came at the right time for me. So really glad I read it.
That's perfect. Yeah. Great recommendations all around, and big thumbs up on the Chris Stapleton decision.
I love it. My 6-year-old sings White Horse. It's pretty funny.
My 6-year-old sings White Horse all the time. It's one of her favorites. I don't know. All right. It just connects with 6-year-olds. That's a cool fact we've now discovered here.
That's awesome.
Well, Adam, my friend, I appreciate you being on the show, sharing your wisdoms. There's some real meat and potato stuff that people can do with their teams coming right off of this. Yeah, but if they're looking for big leverage, I highly recommend they reach out to you. So thank you for your time and insight, Adam.
Thank you. Good being with you.
And we'll see you all in the next episode of They Don't Teach This in Law School.